Hey guys, this is MusicTechHelpGuy, and welcome to another episode of Free Plugin Weekly. Today we're checking out the OTT Multiband Compressor from Xfer Records. OTT is a multiband upwards and downwards compressor, which means that the signal can be expanded, it can move upward, or it can be compressed downward like a traditional compressor, but it's also multiband. So it's split into three different bands, a high, mid, and low band. The OTT compressor also looks a little bit different than most compressor plugins that you've probably used, so let's quickly go over each of the controls and then I'll show you some musical examples. So you can see at the top there's four knobs. We have depth, time, input gain, and output gain. Depth is essentially the depth of the compression effect. And one of the things about this compressor is it can also sort of act like a multi-band exciter or harmonic enhancer, as you'll see in all three of these examples. You'll also find that if you pull the depth all the way up, not only do you get more compression, but you get more of the excitation from exciting the bands and compression on each band. So I tend to use a more tame value because it tends to sound too compressed in the higher value. So I'll use something about in probably the mid-30s for this instrument. The time simultaneously controls the attack and release time of the compressor. So essentially controls the dynamics of the compressor. So as you pull this up, you get slower attack and release. As you pull this down, you get a quicker attack and release. I'm going to put something more toward the middle. And just like most other plugins, we have an input and output gain option. If you find that your input signal is too loud, you can pull down the input gain. If you find that it's too quiet, you can pull it up. The output gain is the added gain after all of the compression is added. So if you find the overall signal is too quiet, you can pull it up. Or if you find that the overall signal is too loud and you're clipping, you can pull it down. And in the middle here, you can see we have our three bands. We have our high, mid, and low band. On the left side, you can see the amount of compression taking place. So positive values are upward compression, and negative values are downward compression, traditional compression. So you can see that on this track, we have the high frequencies pretty much exclusively being expanded or upwardly compressed. The mid frequencies are being downward compressed, and the low frequencies are being upward compressed just a bit. Now let me explain how to read the meters in this compressor. It looks a little bit different, again, than most compressors. The blue meter bar is essentially the actual signal after compression. The little yellow dot is the dry signal before compression. So you can see that the high band, because the blue bar is higher than the yellow dot, that we have upward compression or expansion. You can see with the mid band that the blue bar is lower than the yellow dot, showing that we have downward compression. Now each meter is also broken up into two halves. So on the left, you have this sort of yellowish brown shading, and on the right, you have this greenish shading. And then in between, you have these black bars. Well, these black bars can be moved around. So if you pull the black bar more toward the green, you'll find that the signal will have more upward compression. And if you pull more toward the brown, you'll see that the signal has more downward compression. So essentially, the black bar is like our compression threshold. So I'm going to pull this so that we get a bit of expansion in the high end on this track. And there we go. Another thing you can do is on the right here, you can see the high, mid, and low frequency bands all have a knob. This is essentially the makeup gain for each band. So you can see that even though we're compressing down the high signal here, we're actually adding additional gain to the high frequency signal. And then at the bottom, there is an upward and downward percentage. This is essentially the kind of like the compression ratio, if you will. It's the amount of upward or downward compression that you have. So if you want to have just a little bit of downward compression when it's present and a lot of upward compression, you'd pull down the downward percentage and pull up the upward, or vice versa. All right, so let's listen to some musical examples. The first one is just piano. And what I'll do is I will bypass the compressor to start, and then I will kick in the compressor and then kick it out a couple times so you can hear the before and after. The goal here was that we had piano that was kind of boxy, kind of soft and tame sounding, and I really wanted to give the high frequencies some punch and really give the piano a bit more percussiveness element, especially in the high and mid frequencies. For the next example, I have some synth strings. They're already pretty bright to begin with, but using OTT, we're going to make these strings sound much brighter and much more present. Again, like I said, it can function kind of like a multiband exciter, so we're going to excite the high and mid-range bands while taming down the low end. Much brighter and much more in your face. Next up, let's try it out in a whole mix. This is a fully mixed song with no mastering on it whatsoever. So we're going to use OTT to do some gentle bus compression, but then also sort of control the low end and brighten the high end, but also pull up the mid-range a bit to basically make the guitars come out a bit more in the mix. So that example is a bit more subtle than the other two, but the song has a lot more smack to it. The vocals kind of come up a bit, the guitar comes up a bit, and we've controlled the low end and the bass and the kick drum quite a bit. All right, so that's the OTT Multiband Upwards and Downwards Compressor from Xfer. I'll leave a link to how you can get this plugin for free in the video description below. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.